It wasn't the words that broke me, not at first. It was the silence around the words, the texture of the air she displaced with her breath when she spoke his name, a name I still didn't know. I found the old Marantz field recorder tucked away in a box of obsolete cables in the garage, a relic from a past project capturing ambient garden sounds. Curiosity, maybe boredom, made me check the memory card. I hadn't used it in years, certainly hadn't planted it again. But there was a file, recent, dated just 3 days prior. I slipped on my professional headphones, the ones that isolate the world, and pressed play. It started with the familiar chirping of sparrows near the back hedge, the rustle of leaves, the sounds I'd originally intended to capture. Then, voices. Hers, Isabel's, unmistakable but lower, closer to the microphone than it should have been. And his, unfamiliar, a low murmur. "Don't know how long we can keep this up," the man's voice said, slightly muffled, perhaps by proximity or an obstruction. Isabel sighed, a sound I knew intimately, usually reserved for frustration with stubborn weeds or a design that wouldn't quite click. But this sigh was different. It was heavy, weighted with something other than garden worries. "I know, but Mark," she paused, and in that pause, in the infinitesimal space between her words, I heard it. Not just hesitation, but a coolness, a clinical detachment when she uttered my name. It was like hearing a specimen described, not a husband of 20 years. "He suspects nothing. He's too wrapped up in his frequencies." A small laugh escaped her then, airy and quick, but brittle. It wasn't the full-throated laugh she shared with me over dinner, the one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. This was a conspirator's laugh, thin and sharp. He murmured something indistinct, then, "Friday, then? The usual spot?" "Yes," she breathed, and the sound was closer, warmer than when she'd spoken my name. "I'll find a reason. He won't question it." The recording ended a few moments later with the crunch of gravel, footsteps fading away. I sat there on the dusty garage stool, the headphones sealing me in a world suddenly filled with deafening silence. My own heartbeat thudded against the ear pads. He suspects nothing. Too wrapped up in his frequencies. It wasn't the confirmation of secrecy, it was the casual dismissal, the assessment of me as an oblivious obstacle, easily managed, easily deceived. The sound engineer, the man who listened for a living, hadn't heard a thing. The irony was a physical ache in my chest. I took off the headphones, the ordinary sounds of the afternoon, a distant lawnmower, a car passing on the street, flooding back in, feeling alien and jarring. Isabel was inside, probably sketching at the kitchen island, planning someone else's perfect landscape. I pushed the recorder back into the box, burying it under a tangle of XLR cables. But the sound file, the echo of her voice, the cold space around my name was now permanently etched onto the memory card in my head. My world, meticulously balanced, had just been thrown completely out of phase. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I stood up, my legs stiff, and walked towards the house, towards the woman whose voice I suddenly didn't recognize at all. Walking back into the kitchen felt like crossing a border into enemy territory. Isabel looked up from her large sketchbook, a graphite pencil tucked behind her ear, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. She smiled, the familiar, open smile that had always felt like coming home. Now it looked like a mask, expertly applied. "Hey," she said, her voice bright, casual. "Just wrestling with the drainage plan for the Henderson project. You wouldn't believe the slope on their back lawn." Her voice. I listened, dissecting it. The pitch, the cadence, the slight rise at the end of the sentence. Was there a tremor? A fraction too much ease? Or was I manufacturing anomalies now, tuning my perception to find fault? He suspects nothing. The phrase looped in my head, a feedback squeal I couldn't gate. "Sounds tricky," I managed, my own voice sounding distant, detached, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady only through conscious effort. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head, her brow furrowing slightly in that way that usually signaled genuine concern. "You seem quiet." There it was, the opening, the chance to shatter the afternoon calm, to hold up the recording like a weapon. "Are you seeing someone? Who was that man in the garden?" The questions formed hot and acidic at the back of my throat, but I swallowed them down with the cold water. Not yet. Confrontation felt insufficient. It was too blunt an instrument for the delicate layered deceit I'd just uncovered. Besides, what would she do? Deny it? Weep? Feign indignation? I'd heard her voice on that recording. Cool, dismissive, strategic. The woman capable of that conversation wouldn't crumble under a direct question. She'd manage it, just like she managed me. "Just thinking," I said, forcing a half-smile. "Long day analyzing transducer specs. My brain's a bit fried." "Ah, the frequencies," she said, turning back to her sketch, accepting the explanation without a second thought. And just like that, the moment passed. She believed me, because I was predictable, safe, wrapped up in things she didn't need to understand. The next few days were a blur of strained normalcy. I went through the motions, work, meals, evening routines, but everything was filtered through the knowledge humming beneath the surface. I watched her constantly, the way she angled her phone away when a text came in, the slight hesitation before answering a call, glancing at the screen first, the time she'd stay late at the studio she rented downtown, citing demanding clients or needing uninterrupted focus. Things I'd barely registered before now screamed suspicion. Her laughter felt different, sometimes forced. Her touch, when she brushed my arm or leaned against me on the sofa, felt calculated, a performance for an audience of one who wasn't supposed to know he was watching a play. I found myself analyzing the acoustics of our life, the silences that stretched too long, the careful modulation in her tone, the way certain topics were neatly sidestepped. I remembered installing the sound system in our living room years ago, calibrating it perfectly for optimal listening. We'd sat on the floor, listening to Miles Davis, and she'd leaned her head on my shoulder. "It sounds perfect, Mark," she'd whispered, "like he's right here." Back then, the shared intimacy felt real, resonant. Now the memory was overlaid with the static of the recording, distorting it into something else entirely. Had any of it been real? Or was I always just the background noise to her main performance? Thursday evening arrived, heavy with unspoken anticipation. Isabel was packing a small overnight bag. "Just heading up to the cabin early," she announced, folding a sweater. "Want to get a head start on clearing some brush before the weekend. You don't mind, do you?" The cabin. Our shared retreat. Not the usual spot mentioned on the recording. Was this a lie? Or was the rendezvous planned for after she arrived there? My mind raced, mapping possibilities, analyzing the deception. "No, go ahead," I said, keeping my voice even. "Be careful on the roads." "Always," she smiled, zipping the bag. The ease of the lie was breathtaking. Friday morning, she kissed me goodbye at the door, a quick, dutiful peck on the cheek. "See you tomorrow afternoon?" "Yeah," I said, watching her walk down the path to her car. Her steps were light, unburdened. She didn't look back. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, the silence in the house became immense, suffocating. My first instinct was to follow, to drive to that usual spot, a discreet hotel bar downtown she'd mentioned attending networking events at before, and confront them, catch them in the act. But as I stood there, the echo of her dismissive voice replaying in my mind, "He suspects nothing." Too wrapped up in his frequencies, another thought took hold. Why give them the satisfaction of a scene? Why play the role of the wounded husband storming in? That was their script, not mine. I walked back into the living room, the space suddenly feeling too large, too empty. I looked at the high-end speakers, the amplifier, the turntable, my frequencies, my world. She thought it made me oblivious. Maybe she was right, but maybe she'd underestimated what listening truly meant. It wasn't just about sound waves, it was about patterns, deviations, the truth hidden in the noise. I picked up the remote for the sound system. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I knew what I needed to do. Not chase her, not yet. I needed to listen. Carefully. I needed to understand the whole composition before I decided how to change the mix. I sat down in my usual listening chair, the leather sighing under my weight. The silence was still there, but it felt different now, pregnant, waiting. My finger hovered over the power button. I didn't turn on the music. The silence was the signal I needed to analyze now. My work involved isolating frequencies, identifying anomalies, filtering out noise to find the pure tone. This was no different. Isabel's life, our life, had become a complex waveform riddled with distortion. My job was to find the source. Instead of driving downtown, I went to my home office, the room that was truly mine, filled with schematics, audio equipment, and the quiet hum of electronics. I sat down at my computer, not to work, but to look at patterns, shared accounts, credit card statements, the digital breadcrumbs of a life lived together. It wasn't about snooping in the traditional sense. This was data analysis. There they were, charges from the Cedar Lounge, the discreet hotel bar downtown. Not just once or twice, but recurring. Little spikes in the financial data on Tuesday and Friday evenings over the past few months, coinciding perfectly with her late nights at the studio or meeting with demanding clients. Small amounts, usually. Drinks, maybe appetizers, easily overlooked if you weren't specifically scanning for irregularities. Each charge felt like a small betrayal, a documented lie. Then larger anomalies, hotel charges, not near the cabin, but city center hotels booked under her name, paid with our shared card. Dates that lined up with supposed overnight work crunches or early starts for site visits. Each one a carefully constructed piece of the narrative she'd fed me, now exposed as hollow. The precision of it, the long-term planning, was what struck me most. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This was a system, an architecture of deceit built right under my roof, funded by our shared resources. I leaned back, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. The anger I expected felt muted, overshadowed by a profound sense of fatigue and a chilling clarity. She hadn't just lied, she had managed our entire life as a cover story. Every shared plan, every casual conversation, every trip to the cabin, how much of it was real and how much was misdirection. I thought back to our anniversary dinner 2 months ago. She'd seemed distant, checking her phone more than usual. She blamed it on a looming deadline. "Sorry, Mark," she'd said, squeezing my hand across the table, her eyes earnest. "This Henderson project is just consuming me." A project I now knew involved late nights at the Cedar Lounge, not wrestling with drainage plans. The memory, once just slightly off-key, now resonated with the flat tone of outright falsehood. Did she ever love me? Or was I just part of the initial design, the foundation for the life she wanted to build, later deemed outdated and scheduled for demolition? The questions echoed in the quiet room, unanswered. Friday evening stretched ahead, empty and vast. The urge to go to the Cedar Lounge returned, stronger this time, not to confront, but to see, to stand in the space where she enacted this other life. I needed to understand the acoustics of her betrayal. I drove downtown, the city lights blurring past. The hotel was upscale, discreet. The Cedar Lounge was dimly lit, filled with polished wood, soft leather chairs, and the low murmur of conversations. It smelled of expensive perfume and aged spirits. I took a seat at the far end of the bar, ordering a whiskey. Neat. I watched the door, not expecting them. She was supposedly at the cabin, but observing the patrons, couples leaning close, business types making deals, solitary figures nursing drinks. Which role did Isabel play here? The sophisticated professional? The clandestine lover? Did she laugh that brittle laugh here? Did she speak my name with that same cool detachment? Sitting there, surrounded by strangers, felt like being underwater. The reality of her double life pressed in on me. This wasn't just an affair, it was a performance piece, staged in place like this, while I calibrated speakers at home, oblivious in my soundproofed world. I finished my drink, the burn sharp and grounding. Seeing the place didn't bring rage, only a deeper sense of alienation. This world she inhabited felt foreign, slick, and ultimately empty. I paid my tab and left, the manufactured intimacy of the lounge feeling colder than the night air outside. Driving home, I felt a shift inside me. The need for answers, for confrontation, was fading, replaced by something harder. A resolve, like finding the exact frequency that cancels out unwanted noise. She had underestimated me, dismissed my quiet focus as ignorance. She didn't realize that listening, true listening, reveals everything. The subtle shifts, the hidden harmonies, the jarring dissonance. I spent the rest of the evening and most of Saturday in a state of quiet activity. I didn't pace or rage. I organized my files, backed up my work, cleaned the filters on my best microphones. Routine tasks, but performed with a new precision, a focus that felt almost detached. It wasn't about preparing for a fight. It was about restoring order to my own system, reinforcing my own foundations. Late Saturday afternoon, the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway pulled me from my work. I walked to the living room window, parting the curtain slightly. Isabel's car sat gleaming in the driveway. She got out, stretching, pulling her overnight bag from the passenger seat. She looked tired, but relaxed, like someone returning from a weekend retreat. She hadn't seen me yet. She paused, looking up at the house, her expression unreadable from this distance. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands weren't shaking. I felt a strange calm, the quiet intensity of an amplifier humming just before the music starts. The recording was still in the box in the garage. The financial data was saved on my hard drive. The image of the Cedar Lounge was burned into my memory. I had listened. I had analyzed. The waveform of our marriage was clear now, the distortion undeniable. She walked towards the front door, her keys jingling faintly, a sound that cut through the afternoon quiet. What frequency comes next? What sound do I make now? The silence in the room felt immense, waiting for my input. The key turned in the lock, the familiar click echoing slightly in the hallway. Isabel pushed the door open, dragging her bag inside with a sigh that sounded genuinely weary this time. She dropped the bag by the stairs and ran a hand through her hair. "Home," she announced, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Traffic was murder coming back down the mountain. "Oh?" I replied, my voice neutral. I stayed where I was, near the living room doorway, not moving towards her for the usual homecoming hug. A small deviation, but one she didn't seem to notice immediately. She kicked off her boots, leaving them by the mat. Yeah, bumper to bumper, after exit 42. But the peace and quiet up there was worth it. Got so much done, cleared almost the whole back slope. She gestured vaguely, miming physical effort. Another layer added to the narrative. Another frequency smoothed over. "Good," I said. Silence stretched for a beat, longer than usual. She finally looked at me properly, her head tilting slightly. "Everything okay?" she asked, the faint line appearing between her brows again. "Fine," I replied. "Just processing." "Frequencies?" she offered, a hint of the old teasing warmth in her tone, but it landed flat, discordant. "Something like that," I agreed. She walked past me towards the kitchen, presumably for water or coffee. "Well, I'm exhausted. Think I'll take a quick shower." "Okay," I said. My calmness felt solid now, like bedrock beneath shifting sands. This wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, more precise. It was the moment you isolate the feedback loop and prepare to cut the power. She paused at the kitchen entrance, turning back. "You sure you're all right? You seem distant." Distant. The irony wasn't lost on me. I met her gaze directly, holding it for perhaps the first time without filtering it through the lens of forced normalcy. I didn't answer her question. Instead, I turned and walked towards the hallway closet where I'd temporarily stored the box from the garage. My movements felt deliberate, unhurried. I reached into the box, my fingers closing around the cool metal casing of the Marantz field recorder. It felt heavy in my hand, weighted with the truth it held. Isabel watched me, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "What's that?" I didn't reply immediately. I walked back towards the kitchen island where she stood, her hand hovering near the kettle. The polished granite surface gleamed under the track lighting. With a quiet click, I placed the recorder on the counter between us. It sat there, small and unassuming, yet dominating the space. Her eyes fixed on it, recognition dawning slowly, then widening almost imperceptibly. Her hand froze mid-air. The color began to drain from her face, leaving behind the smudged charcoal from yesterday's sketching, like a faint bruise. My finger found the play button. I pressed it. The sound filled the quiet kitchen, not loudly, but with absolute clarity, thanks to the quality of the device. First, the familiar chirping of sparrows near the back hedge, then the rustle of leaves, and then her voice, low and close, saying the name of the man I still didn't know. "Don't know how long we can keep this up." Isabel recoiled as if struck, her breath catching in a sharp, audible gasp. Her eyes darted from the recorder to my face, wide with dawning horror and disbelief. The carefully constructed acoustics of our life shattered in an instant. The air vibrated with the unspoken, the revealed. Her mask was gone. The man's voice filled the space, muffled but clear enough. "Don't know how long we can keep this up." Isabel didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on the small machine on the counter, as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Her breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. I watched the tremor start in her hands, her fingers clenching and unclenching at her sides. Then came her sigh on the recording, heavy and weighted, and her voice, uttering my name with that chilling detachment. "I know, but Mark—" At the sound of her own recorded voice speaking my name so clinically, a strangled noise escaped her throat. It wasn't a word, just a raw expulsion of air, like the wind being knocked out of her. She took a step back, bumping against the counter edge, her knuckles white where she gripped it for support. The recording continued, capturing her thin, brittle laugh. The sound seemed amplified in the tense silence of the kitchen. I felt nothing watching her crumble. Not satisfaction, not anger, not even pity. It was like observing a complex piece of equipment fail under stress testing, clinical, detached. The emotional feedback loop had been severed. I was just registering the data now. "Friday, then? The usual spot?" the man's recorded voice asked. "Yes," her recorded voice breathed, warmer, closer. "I'll find a reason. He won't question it." The recording played out the final seconds of footsteps on gravel, then clicked into silence. The absence of sound rushed back in, thick and heavy. Isabel remained frozen, her gaze still fixed on the recorder, her face pale and strained. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall, trapped behind a dam of shock. She finally lifted her eyes to meet mine. They were filled with a desperate, frantic energy, searching my face for what? A sign of rage? A hint of forgiveness? An opening to explain, to spin, to manage this? "Mark," she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible. I didn't wait for her to finish. I didn't need the explanation, the excuses, the carefully crafted narrative she would inevitably try to construct. I had heard the raw signal. I knew the truth contained in the spaces between her words, in the tone she used when she thought I wasn't listening. I reached out and pressed the stop button on the recorder, then the power button, plunging the device back into silence. The small indicator light went dark. I picked it up, its weight familiar now, almost comforting in its solid reality. I turned away from her, away from the wreckage on her face, away from the kitchen that suddenly felt like a stage set after the play had ended. I walked back towards the living room, the recorder still in my hand. The house was utterly silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of clarity. The silence after the signal cuts out. Behind me, I heard a faint sound, perhaps the beginning of a sob, perhaps just her breath finally catching. I didn't turn around. The frequencies were finally clear, Just static now. Everything.